So I just want to, as always, thank our sponsors. We have been sponsored for the last 3 or 4 years running by the Madison Foundation. They have been gracious sponsors of this series. And this year in particular, we were sponsored by the John Brady and Roberta Islieb Fund. They are a component fund of the Madison Foundation, and we are eternally grateful for their support. It makes these lectures possible. The other thing I wanted to mention to our supporters, those of you who have logged on, these past couple of years on Zoom, who have joined us in the past in person, I'd love to hear from you. What other topics would you like us to cover? So in recent years, we've really tried to cover topics of maybe more interest to related to what's happening in our lives at the time. So we have covered immigration. We've covered, obviously we're now covering Connecticut's indigenous peoples. We've covered slavery and social justice. In the past, we've done local farms. We've done historic preservation, the built environment. I would love feedback from people. So my email is director@madisonhistory.org and would love to get feedback. So this is our 15th year. We would love to keep it going at least another 15 years, so would love feedback from you in terms of what you would like us to cover moving forward. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. Nakai Northrup serves as head educator of the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, where he has spent more than 10 years developing educational programs on Eastern Woodland tribal history and culture for visitors of all ages. Nakai is completing his degree in business management at Mitchell College and is the vice chair of the tribe's Natural Resources Protection Committee. He also serves as a board member of the Stonington Historical Society. An avid hunter and fisherman, Nakai is a frequent speaker and lecturer on historic preservation, environmental indigenous activism, food sovereignty, and teaching traditional Eastern Woodland histories and lifeways. Having both Mashantucket Pequot and Narragansett bloodlines, Nakai has spent his entire life on both reservations and is a passionate advocate and activist for Native American rights. With a strong love for his tribal communities and as a father of 2 beautiful children, Nakai is dedicated to preserving tribal histories and passing down cultural traditions to younger generations. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to present Nakai Northrup.
Thank you, thank you. In my language, we say katapatiamu. Wikisuk, welcome. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to speak with everyone today. The topic that I'm going to be covering is the program's called A Pequot Story, and it goes through the entirety of the history of the Pequot people, broken down into key events, going back roughly 20,000 years. And working our way up in time. And then after that, we'll be available for question and answer. So to jump right in, all people have a creation story, a belief of how their people came to be and came to this land. For the Northeastern region, there's a widespread story of Sky Woman. The Narragansett people have a story that our people come from ash trees, the trees that we used to make our baskets. But for Sky Woman is a pretty interesting story that covers most of the Northeast. It goes into Ojibwe country and goes up into the Haudenosaunee people as well, in upstate New York and Canada. And Sky Woman is a story of a storm happening up in Skyroll. And she went for a walk. She was pregnant. She was trying to soothe herself. So she went for a walk around Skyworld and she was seeing the damage that was caused from the storm. And a giant tree fell and it left a hole in Skyworld. And she was curious. And as she peeked down through that hole, she saw Earth. But at this time, Earth was a planet of only water. There was no land on it whatsoever. And she got so curious and she was peeking down through that hole that she actually slipped and fell in. And she started falling down towards Earth. And as she was getting closer and closer, the waterfowl, the ducks, the geese started to fly over to her and guide her fall down and lead her down to Earth. And as she approached that ocean, a giant turtle arose and they placed her on the back of the turtle and she had to cry out for help. And she asked all of her relatives, all of her blood to come assist her. And so the fish came, beavers, otters, muskrat, the whales, the sharks. And she said, I have a task for you all. If you can complete this task, I can bring life here, and I can bring more, I can create more than what you know today. Uh, so the whale said, sure enough, I'm the biggest animal in the ocean. This is not a problem for me. And with one flip of his tail was to the bottom of the ocean to reach down to grab earth, that mud, that dirt. But he has big giant fins, so it wasn't working out for him. The shark said, I'm the fiercest animal. This is not a problem for me, but ran into the same predicament. And there was a little muskrat sitting on the back of that turtle. And he said, I can do it. And they all kind of laughed and chuckled because he's just a small, kind of smelly little fella. And he took a deep breath and he dove off the back of the turtle, but no one really paid him any mind. And after a while, he wasn't coming up, but he was working, giving it all his might, swimming to the bottom. And with his little paw, he was able to grab earth. And he swam back up and was so exhausted from that journey that he actually perished. And they took that dirt from its paw and planted seeds, and then land was spread. So we call North America Turtle Island because of this. And we also use the turtle shell, and this is a pretty universal indigenous thing, is a turtle shell as a calendar. A turtle shell has 13 spaces on its back to represent the 13 full moons in a year. And seasonality becomes a really big part of our life. Once we're getting into the 1500s, around 8,000 years ago, is when it really started to kick in, when our forests started to change into temperate forests like how we have today. But from this is a story that I've heard told for a course of hours, and I just kind of gave you guys a crash course version. But different communities have different little twists to their story as you travel around. But coming from that creation, my people live in southeastern Connecticut. I'm Pequot, and I'm also Narragansett, right in Charlestown, Rhode Island. And we're a coastal people today. We live right by the water, and we really rely on the sea. We believe that the sea has a spirit that we call Pompagussit, and water in our language is Napi. And before we go out and go harvest quahogs or go fishing, or even just taking a paddle, we always say a prayer, because the ocean is something that is very powerful. It can go from being very flat and calm and like glass, to, massive waves and swirls and tides that can really cause damage. And it seems to humble us always. So we always pay our respects and leave tobacco and give thanks and hope for a safe travel and a good harvest. And that's how we've been for thousands of years. And for example, my Narragansett people, we have an oral history of living out in an area today which is completely submerged by the ocean in the Long Island Sound. We were living out on the continental shelf, and I was fortunate enough a few years back to go on the research vessel, the Endeavor, with the University of Rhode Island, as we were looking for underwater paleo landscapes. We've done some work off of Block Island, and we were out in the Newportish area, and we were taking core samples and doing scans of the bottom. But we have a story, an oral tradition on my Narragansett family, of a mass rush of water coming in around 15,000 years ago, and our people having to flee inland, which is just inland became where the coast was now with that massive flow of water. And if you look at the historical depth charts, around 15,000 years ago, there's a consistent rise in water, and that's due to, our glaciers melting and these sea levels really, really starting to rise. And glaciers in our area play a huge role. We have a lot of ceremonial sites that have to do with glacial landscapes and rocks being left in certain areas. For example, we have a place in our reservation called Balancing Rock, and it sits on the edge of a cliff. And our oral story behind it is that if it's to fall off of that cliff or to fall, then it'll bring misfortune to the community. So people try to push it all the time. Yeah, that's messy. But right across from that is Council Rocks, and it's a big stone face with multiple boulders in a circle that sit around. And my people have been gathering there for thousands of years, and we still participate in ceremony there today. we're finding artifacts on the reservation that we're currently on in Mashantucket, Connecticut, right Ledyard area, 2,500 acres. We found artifacts about 15,000 years old from different spawn points. Similar, like close area to Foxwoods is where we found a big portion of different sites, mud homes that we're finding in fields that are in this paleo time period. But as these temperatures start to change and rise, this is when my people really start to thrive. And that's because the land is offering more gifts and offering more opportunity. In that glacial time period, it's much smaller family groups. And we're, relying on following caribou, and we're revolving on not having a consistent horticulture and being able to get in and plant corn, beans, and squash, which became such a staple for us later in time. And we really had to focus on more of a protein-rich diet and having to move around to follow food. Whereas as this temperature started to change and the land is offering us more, I always tell people we're spoiled for the region that we live in today, because we have the coast, which is about 15 miles away from us, 10, 15 miles, and then we have the forest where our reservation is placed today. And, our coast provides all the shellfish that you could ever want, and saltwater life. We were whaling and we were harvesting seals as well. And then the forests are filled with deer and turkey and a bunch of other small game, which were abundant. So I always tell people, if you really take the time to learn how to survive here, this land offers you quite a bit. And it's really, really hard to starve in southeastern Connecticut. And that is huge for us. And I'm going to touch more into the seasonality as we get later on into the talk, because that ties in heavily with food sovereignty today, is eating what's in season. But jumping forward, we're going to jump to the 1500s now. In the 1500s, we're starting to have contact with the Dutch. The Dutch are arriving, and they're coming for what I call the first gold rush of North America, and that's the beaver fur trade. The Dutch were coming here to trade and trap beavers to send back to Europe, in turn to make nice, cool, waterproof hats and different gear that everyone had to have. And if we didn't change our fashion sense 500 years ago, then we probably wouldn't have beaver here today. But this was a key relationship, and we were able to get a lot of new resources that really improved and made our life easier. And there's a common misconception of indigenous people and technology with a lot of people, but they're like, your ancestors wouldn't use that. That's not traditional, and things like this. And our comeback is, well, if they had it, they would definitely use it, because our people were all about being effective and what works. So when the Dutch arrived, we're getting metal tools now. Prior, we're making bracelets, and we can make armbands and things along those lines. But when you're getting really into those thick brass pots and iron pots, we didn't have the capabilities at that time. So when the Dutch arrived and brought that, that made the simple act of cooking, something that we all need to do every day, so much easier, because now you don't need to go down to the river and get river clay and form your pot and then heat your pot and get it to be cook worthy. And then you're not going to put that directly over the fire because it'll break. So you're cooking indirect heat, and that food is taking a lot longer to cook, when in turn you put a cast iron right over the fire and you're really get going. Another example are different trade cloths that really, really improved our life, and the fact that, in the summer months, most of the majority of our clothing are fur and leather, which is extremely hot. And these lighter cloths and clothing made life a lot easier. And like I mentioned, the beaver played a huge role, and still does for our people today. We still harvest beaver because it's who we are and what we've been doing. And we have tons and tons of beaver on reservation. And so we're always getting calls from people frustrated from them damming up certain spots, because they are constantly working. And it's become, getting more in touch with traditional food sources. So taking the initiative, when we get these beaver, we share it with the community, because this is something that we were eating 500 years ago, and not everyone gets to say they have beaver on their table. but getting the tribal youth used to that, because you get to a certain age and you're pretty set on what you're eating and what you're comfortable eating in your palate. So that's why we really encourage starting younger kids with a wide variety and letting them feel out what they want. My two kids eat everything. They eat duck, they eat fish, they eat venison, they eat squirrel. And that's because I didn't support just the chicken fingers and apple slices and boxed macaroni and cheese. I wanted them to have a really traditional diet. And so no supporting picky eaters in my household. Jumping forward to the 1600s, now we're having more contact with the English. And the Pequot were one of the largest tribes in the region. And we had a pretty strong hold on the beaver fur trade at this point with the Dutch. We gave them a trading post on the Connecticut River. When the English arrived, we formed a relatively good trade relationship. And it was so good that we actually gave them a trading post closer up on the river than the Dutch, which then started to cause some hostilities between the English and the Dutch and the Pequots, and people feeling like we were having a monopoly over the beaver fur trade. And this was a very lucrative business, so it caused drama. That's one of the main causes of war, is money and greed. So the English arrived, and that started to sour a little bit. And something that really kicked off a huge war in our area was the capturing of one of our sachems, Tadabon. And he was actually captured by a Dutchman, and he made a ransom of 50,000 wampum beads. The average time back then to make a traditional wampum bead is about 2 hours per bead. And they delivered 50,000 wampum beads for his ransom and 30 beaver pelts. And he was shot in the back and thrown off the ship. He took the goods and left. A couple months later, another ship came down the river, and the son of that sachem sought revenge and went on that ship and killed the captain. But that ship was an English ship, not a Dutch ship, which for the Pequot people at that time was hard to distinguish the difference between an Englishman and a Dutchman in those areas. And that led to the English then wanting retribution, wanting to fight, wanting something in return, which the Pequot people weren't going to hand over any of their people because they felt they had been wronged as well. Another key moment in the 1600s is the sickness that was then brought here and that started to spread. The English were coming here to start a new life. The Dutch were here really to focus on making money. But the English were here to stay. And the English came, and they're taking a 100-foot ship across the Atlantic Ocean. Lots of germs and bacteria build up on those ships, especially when you're bringing cattle, chickens, pigs, and domesticated animals. A lot of germs and bacteria is built up. So when they arrived here, they brought over different sicknesses that our bodies didn't have a built up immunity to, that really did more damage to my people than any war that we participated in. Prior to fighting in the Pequot War in the 1630s, we lost half of our population to disease. We went from around 10,000 Pequots to 5,000 Pequots in a 20-year period. And that left us with 1,000 fighting men, the rest being women, children, and elders. So this really took a toll on us, and this in turn led to little more hostilities and pickings along the way. And we were starting to realize that we were too different to make it work at this point. There was the propaganda that was being put out and sent to England of indigenous people of this land, and they're portraying indigenous people with horns and devil tails and sharp fangs. So prior to people even arriving on these shores, they already had a bad taste in their mouth about the indigenous people of this land, which in turn then just leads to more racism and more hate on these shores, which doesn't lead to positivity and love, which we were hoping for. So when the war began, the Pequot people were really taking it to the English, because our fighting styles were very different. They were in the method of march within 50 yards of each other and yell fire, and we were meeting them on the trails. And it wasn't until the massacre on May 26, 1637, that they got a victory. And that was officially a week after Connecticut declared war officially on Pequot people, after they were fighting for over a year unofficially. And this was the turning point in the war, because we lost about 600 people in an hour. And from this, which is a very well documented part of the war, the massacre is really the climax of the war that people focus on. But there was a 4-mile retreat from after them burning down the site in Mystic. And it's called the fort. We call it the village because a fort is military and it was a home place for people. They retreated from the Mystic River. That village was right on the Mystic River. You can see it if you go out to the Mystic Seaport and look directly across on that high point. The highest point there is where the village was. And they had to retreat to the Thames River, which is traditionally the Pequot River, which is about 4.5 miles away. And for that entire retreat, there's only a paragraph of information on that we can find today. And we've metal detected the retreat. We've gone through and had Dr. Kevin McBride and his team go through with us, and we found more musket balls and signs of real war from that 4-mile stretch than in the village where 600 people were killed. So the numbers were probably a lot higher that day in loss for the Pequot, and this resulted in mass huntings of Pequot people and sending our sachem Sassacus on the run, which in turn he was fleeing, and he is said to have Mohawk descent, and he was traveling with what is estimated today to be about $3 million in wampum beads, fathoms upon fathoms of wampum. Some people say it was to pay for safe passage and whatnot, but it's rumored that he was killed by Mohawk people and that his head was brought to Hartford and put on a post. But the head that was brought to Hartford was so badly beaten, and it was about 2 or 3 weeks old, so it started decomposing a bit, that it was unrecognizable. So there's the little myth, the little theory that Sassacus lived on and they brought some other head to them, because if you ask Mohawk people today, they deny it. But we really will never know. Jumping forward to the 1700s, and this is after the signing of the Treaty of Hartford in the 1630s, which states Pequot people can no longer live on their land, call themselves Pequots, or speak their language. If they do any of the following, they'll be killed. We were split into 2 separate people. A portion of us were sent to live with the Narragansetts, and another portion were sent to live with the Mohegans, and we were sold for fathoms of white wampum, which traditionally comes from the Atlantic whelk. And so this divide is something that's still relevant today, because today there's 2 Pequot tribes. There's the Mashantucket Pequot Tribe, who I'm an enrolled member of, and then there's the Eastern Pequot Tribe. And this is simply by the split from a document signed by the King of England. So the Western Pequots, the Mashantucket Pequots, lived with the Mohegans, and the Eastern Pequots lived with the Narragansetts, and they were on the east side of the Pawcatuck River, and we were on the west side of the Pawcatuck River. They were awarded their federal recognition, but are one of the only tribes to have it taken away from them, and that happened in 2005, I believe. And it also happened to Schaghticoke, which is in the upper portion of our state on the New York border. And so it's very rare for it to happen, but it happened twice here in Connecticut at the same time period. And these tribes are now state recognized, and Eastern Pequot lives a mile down the road from Western Pequots on our reservation. And, the proof is in the pudding. You could see that we're family and that we're one people, but because of this document, it's still affecting our people today. So the historical traumas are still relevant and present. And from this, later on, you jump into the 1700s, and we're talking about indentured servitude. 75% of Pequot children were indentured servants in the early 1700s due to, their parents not being able to build traditional style dwellings, Weetus having to build A-frame style homes, and having to, go cut down that tree and send it to the mill and have boards made, have shingles, have nails, and then know someone who knows how to build an A-frame style home. And young women were until 18 years old, and they'd leave with a tool of the trade in the Bible. Young men until 21. And this, there were bad, really horrible portions of this. But one thing that came out of indentured servitude was Robin Castle Cinnamon, who grew up with the Winthrops, and John Winthrop Jr. Played a huge role in Connecticut getting its statehood and was its first deputy governor. And he grew up in the same household as Robin Castle Cinnamon, our first sachem after the Pequot War, who's responsible for getting us the land that we live on today, is Mashantucket. In 1666, we have it posted on the front of our reservation on signs that say 1667, but that's because we have some religious people who were in power at the time who did not like the 666 back to back on the sign. So they put 1667 as the establishment of Mashantucket. And he secured us this land because they both weren't too fond of Uncas's leadership and felt the Pequot people should have some of their homeland back. It was originally supposed to be 2,000 acres in Stonington, but the settlers saw it and said that's prime farmland, which it is, and which it's being used for to this day. Let's send them to the hills of Mashantucket, where fortunately enough for us, we were able to use that to our advantage and make it work. And my community has been very successful. But jumping to the 1800s, we're getting into whaling. Whaling was a huge part of our history, and huge for New England and really the whole world. But specifically in New England, you have New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was the largest whaling port in the world. And right behind that is New London, Connecticut. And New London, Connecticut is 10 miles away from our reservation. And this led to men in my community and my direct descendants being whalers. And this is something that is easily trackable, fortunately enough, for all the ship logs. And, you have to sign in and you're filling out. And a lot of my family members actually kept diaries. So there's a website called the Indian Mariners Project that Dr. Jason Mancini led, which literally tracks my family members all over the world in the 1800s as they're whaling. Because of whaling, I have family in New Zealand today. I have family in Hawaii because they traveled to these areas and they went to the ports and decided to start a new life there. So because of whaling, Pequot people are worldwide. And we were sought out because of our expertise. You even see it in things that aren't true, like Moby Dick. The name of the ship is the Pequod, which is a common reference by the English to the Pequots, calling them Pequods. And then, of course, the harpoonist on the ship was Wampanoag. So the sought outness after of indigenous people in whaling is ever present. And the downside to whaling is one of my direct descendants, Peter George, for the first 10 years of his career in whaling, he was on land for 9 months. His very first voyage, he was gone for 3 years. And at this time, the English actually the United States of America put my tribe on the welfare list and gave us what's called overseers to come to our reservation. And if my child is sick, I need to write to this overseer and ask for medicine. If my child needs a new jacket or new shoes, I need to write and ask for funds and things along these lines. And they would wait until the men were leaving out to sea, and then they'd come to the reservation when a huge portion of our population are out to sea. And they say, oh, it's just women, children, and elderly people on the reservation. They don't need all this land. And this is when Connecticut started the illegal land grabs on the reservation and started taking huge portions of our reservation going from 2,000 acres to about 200 in a short period of time. And they were saying that they were taking the land and they were going to use the funds from the sale to help buy back into the community, but that wasn't happening. And so there's the pros and cons to the whaling business. Jumping into the 1900s now, the American Indian rights movement, Native people weren't considered citizens until 1927 of the United States of America. And then my people had to fight for federal recognition. And Reagan actually denied it the first time. And kind of a rare act, Congress approved our federal recognition because we had petitioned and we have more than enough information. Connecticut is the Pequot word, meaning long tidal river. And you can't drive around Connecticut without the reference to Pequot history and the Pequot War being such a major event, and us still having our land base and being self-governing, the people coming back to the land. A lot of my people left the reservation because it was so hard to live there. They were going to smaller towns like Norwich and Westerly, and they were, buying. There's literally like, those towns are known for very Italian families and Italian streets filled with those families, but there were also entire streets of indigenous people, not just Pequot, but Narragansett and Shinnecock and Wampanoag, Mohegan, people all living together and maintaining and carrying on traditions and practices so that we can still teach them today and still hold on to them today, even though they weren't living on res. But there was a big fight for people to come back to the Pequot reservation, because at one point it got down to just 2 women living on the reservation, and they were a little bit older. And if anything was to happen to them, then they were going to turn the reservation into a national park. So they started to call family, and they literally got family from all over the country to come home. And that's when the real fight for federal recognition came, and we were able to succeed. October 18th of 1983. And that really changed a lot for us, because from this, one of our first chairmen, Skip Hayward, and my great grandmother, Phyllis Monroe Waite, and so many other tribal members had a dream of, financial stability for the people and how to achieve that. And that dream was a casino. And through the Indian Gaming Act, we were able to get that casino. We made a pact with the state of Connecticut saying no other casinos will be built in the state, and we'll pay you 25% of our slot revenue. That 25% of the slot revenue, which has now been for 30 years, totals over $8 billion to the state of Connecticut, which each and every town and city sees a portion of that money every year. It's a minimum of $80 million a year. And we have helped support and buying back into the tribal community. We have a community center where our children can come and be tutored and study and make sure they're getting their homework done, a computer lab if they can't have a computer at home. If parents want to send their children to private school, the tribe will help pay a small portion of that. And they'll also help with secondary education, helping for college, and buying back into the people with knowledge and helping them achieve is really a great thing that the community does and has been doing for quite a while. But all that didn't really come easy. No bank would fund us for Foxwoods. No American bank would fund us for Foxwoods. So we actually had to go with a Malaysian bank. And that really kicked off really fast. We started with a bingo hall and jumped right into a casino shortly after. And the casino, when we opened for the first night, it was supposed to be until 2 a.m. And at 2 a.m, when they went to close the door, there were thousands of people in a line out of the door. So they asked the staff if they'd be willing to stay on. And they took turns napping in the back as we started hiring more people. And we didn't close our doors until we were forced to 2 years ago due to COVID-19, which we're now back up and running. And the community has made some really great moves with the museum in 1998, which is the largest Native American museum in the world. And it's a space that, is going on 25 years old, but seems ever so modern, and has world-class exhibits. And it allows us to tell our story from our perspective. So it's a place that I've been fortunate to work at for going on 10 years and go from a base level educator to being the manager of education. And we get to share our story with tons and tons of little kids, and we get colleges and high schools and senior centers and historical societies. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to tell your people's story and, carry on that history. So that's why I'm so thankful to speak with you all today. And that is a crash course on Pequot people throughout time.
Nakai, thank you so much. So I will open it up to questions. I guess I will kick it off so people can either submit a question or comment through the chat, or if they'd want it to unmute, they could do that as well. My question that I had was regarding the language. How is your language continued to be spoken and learned within the community? I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yep, that's a great question. Our language was, I'm not going to say lost, but hidden for quite a while. And we actually just this year were awarded a grant that allowed us to, we had one person in the community working on language, and we have about 5 fluent speakers. But we had one person focused on the language, and we just got a grant which allowed us to hire 2 younger tribal members to become language instructors. And they're constantly learning, and they're working with different experts, and working with our one language person who we had before, Candace. And they're doing a fantastic job. And, we've been immersing our children in it. We have a daycare on reservation for tribal members, and the children are learning Pequot and they're learning English, and they're going through and, participating in different ceremonies and carrying on traditions at a young age. But language is something that's very exciting right now in Mashantucket, and is we're hoping to follow pace with the Hawaiians. I was looking at something the other day, and they had 7,000 fluent speakers 30 years ago, and they have 30,000 today. So we're in the baby steps now, and we're in it for the long run, and excited for what it will be one day.
I don't know if anyone else has questions. I do have another question, and I don't want to dominate. So please, anyone, they should feel free to unmute. My other question was about food sovereignty. I know that's something that you that is part of your bio, and I'm just wondering if you could talk about food sovereignty, because I also know on your Instagram page that you've talked a little bit about more of the traditional diet, and I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that means, in your community.
Absolutely. So food sovereignty is, eating food from where you're from, eating the foods that your grandma's cooked, and have been around forever. And it really hit me a couple of years back. I've always loved food, and I've always gone out and hunted and fished, and it's been something instilled in me from a long, young age. But I also was a high school student and a college student who ate ramen noodles and chicken tenders and fast foods and went through all that. But something hit me, and I really wanted to start to eat more of a traditional diet. I loved playing basketball. I played basketball in college, and I started eating bad, and I tore my ACL, and I wanted to lose weight. So I started eating a traditional diet, ate a lot of meat and veggies, fruit, and not a lot of carbs. And I ate foods, in the summertime, I'm eating more seafood because that's what my people were eating. In the winter months, I'm eating more venison and turkey and things along those lines. And I was able to drop 70 pounds in a couple of months. And then it really started to help me mentally, and it helped me feel more connected to the land that I'm on and the people that I'm around. Um, and also as a hunter, there's a common misconception that, you know, we hate animals and things like that. But my relationship with, you know, spending more time out in nature, harvesting my food, and, you know, waking up as the forest wakes up, and just being present in the moment really did a lot for me. And my wife did it with me as well, and we both had great results and we're feeling fantastic. And then you look back at, you know, taking away a food sources is an act of genocide. If you look, for example, the Midwest, they kill all the bison, which were the Plains Indians' made food source. And then after they took their, you know, their flaming yawn away and all their resources, they gave them flour, butter, and cheese, and said, live off of this now. And now, because of this, indigenous people are one of the highest leaders in diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease, and obesity. And that's because we're eating foods that our bodies aren't designed to process. Similar to cow milk, most indigenous people are lactose intolerant because it's not something we had. It's not something we consumed. So getting back to eating a traditional diet not only, you know, helps you reconnect with the land, but it helps you heal yourself, because most disease starts in the gut anyways. So, you know, eating healthy foods and what your body can process really helps you out in the long run. And it's been something that I've become passionate about. I'm a cook by hobby, and I've done some pop-ups and I cook traditional meals, but with kind of a modern flair. And, you know, it's hard to make people say, oh, I want to eat cauliflower rice when they've been eating rice and beans and things like that their whole life. But getting them to try different things, a lot of smoked fish. And I like to bring people out and bring them from start to finish. So from harvesting it out of the waters and putting it on a dinner plate and having it look beautiful is something I'm pretty passionate about. But we are all part of this land. Every people here, we all have some piece of land that we belong to and where our people have been. And when we go, traditionally, we become the land again. In time, we'll all be part of this land again. So our ancestors are quite literally the land that we walk on. So that's why we have such a stewardship role, and food sovereignty plays such a huge part in my life, and should in others as well.
We have had a question come in, which is, what roles do the tribal elders play today?
That's a great question. The tribal elders, our grandparents, our aunties and uncles, keep us in line. They deal with all of our enrollments. So they have the committee that you go through, the elders committee and the elders council, and they review everyone who's being enrolled into the community. We don't have blood quantum, it's by lineal descent, being able to trace someone back to our base rolls and the census, the 1900 census report. Today we have a little over 1,000 members in our community. They also deal with banishments as well. So if anyone is to commit any crimes or wrongdoings, then the elders will decide if they're still allowed to be a member of the community. And banishments traditionally are some of the worst punishments that you could do. People are a social people. We need to be around other people to thrive. So it takes a really major act for you to be banished. So it doesn't really happen much. And they also keep us aligned. They're our knowledge keepers. It's very important and something very stressed in indigenous communities to spend time with your grandparents and your elders, your older family members, and be that fly on the wall, be that sponge and take what you can, because we're dealing with problems now. And something that has been present in my mind is that I hear a lot of stories at funerals when people get up and talk, and they're telling all these great stories that no one's ever heard before. But well, it would have been cool to know why that person was still here and I didn't have to be on this occasion. So we're doing projects where we're going to talk and record and have conversations with elders so we can have that information and have it while they're here.
Another question that has come in is, what advice do you have for respectfully attending the Green Corn Festival. Can you also explain what that is? Because I
Yeah,
personally don't know what the Green Corn Festival is.
Green Corn Festival is our powwow. It's called Skimitzen in our language. And Skimitzen at one point was the largest powwow in the world championship of indigenous song and dance. And over 500 tribes attended. Today, it's a little bit smaller scale. We hold it in the heart of our community. Um, and it's open to the public. Anyone can attend. And there's exhibition style dancing and singing. There's native vendors, food and craft. And a really good recommendation I have is we actually have a educational powwow at our museum in July every year. This year it's going to be, I believe, the 8th. It's the Thursday after the 4th of July. And we cover powwow etiquette and we cover the dance styles. So, not touching people's regalia and going touching their eagle feathers that they have on their back, and taking off your hat when they're singing flag songs, and all that etiquette is broken down. But where it's an open experience and it's a welcome experience. And an example of that is people say powwow started in the Midwest after the Wild West show, the Wild Bill show, and that brought a portion of powwow with the more entertainment aspect, with the fancy dance was created from there, more feathers, faster pace, not traditional at all, but it's something we've adopted now. But in the 1700s, there's a document that we have of the sachem of the tribe inviting everyone to come to a powwow, a festival, song and dance. And the English can come too, even though the English were forbidden to attend these events at these times, but the tribal community still put out an invitation for them to come. So everyone is welcome to these events. There's intertribals, which allow everyone to be involved and come in and dance in the arena if they'd like. And it's ceremony. It's healing for us. It's something that we love to do. So don't be scared to ask questions, because it's better to be in the known than to be ignorant to. So yeah, feel free to come. I urge you to come. It's a great time. And I look forward to seeing you if you do come.
Another question that has come in is a person asks, they said, I am Scandinavian, and they said Vikings came to North America 1,000 years ago. And is there any record of interaction between the Pequots and the Vikings?
That is a fantastic question. So on my father's side, I actually have a Scandinavian background as well. And there isn't any direct that I have knowledge of. There's none that I've been told of, at least. But when you start getting more into like Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, that Maine, New Hampshire area, I know they have stories of Vikings.
Okay. So do you know of any books or anything that you think anyone, if they were interested?
I'm trying to think. I haven't done much focus on Viking Contact. It's been predominantly Dutch and English. But I can reference some in an email to you if you'd like. And
yeah, that'd be great. If you come across anything, and then that way I'll pass it along to the list.
Yeah, I can ask our collections manager and see if they have anything.
That would be fantastic. Another question that came in is, I know that there's ample evidence of early fishing in the waters around Hammonasset Park. Were your people fishing here and possibly in the Hammonasset River? Have you searched for evidence of tools and fishing equipment in the Madison area?
That is a great question. Yeah, our Aboriginal territory is massive. You really can't place anywhere in Connecticut where Pequot people weren't in that area. We have, if it wasn't directly Pequot people, we had tributaries in smaller tribes who, became Pequot people for protection, essentially. And we were fishing all over in the major rivers and in the Sound with weirs commonly, and then we were also doing nets and harpoon. I know that specifically, Namiog, which is present day New London, has more resources in the fact of finding stuff. But I can check in archives as well and see if there's any in the Manassas area. But I'm 99% sure that they were definitely fishing there.
Another question that has just come in is, what do you think of Jeff Benedict's book, Without Reservation? I'm not sure.
That is,
You know?
yeah, that I think it's a terrible book. No, Mashantuckets typically aren't big fans of Jeff Benedict because he's writing from an outside perspective rather than consulting with the community. And everyone's entitled to their opinion, and everyone has a right to, their own words, but it's far from the truth of my people. And it was insulting.
I guess, is it worth, at least saying what's the premise of his book? And
yeah, it's basically a couple hundred pages of tribal slander, and bring the origins of the casino and the community coming back, and yeah.
Okay. Well, I certainly don't want to end it on that note. I will also ask your involvement in the Stonington Historical Society. I'm interested in that, and what role do you play there?
Awesome. Yeah, I was really blessed with an opportunity to become a director of the Stonington Historical Society. I met with the executive director, and they came to the museum for a tour, and they were interested in some of the Pequot objects that they had in their collections. And it's a time where, indigenous involvement is growing more and more. And a lot of people are starting to see that we are primary resources for history here in Connecticut, and for life for thousands of years. And so they asked me to help be a part of it. I've been working with Eastern Woodland history and Pequot history for a long period of time. I've developed a lot of programs and curated exhibits, and they gave me an opportunity, and I helped them out with providing indigenous perspectives, going over whaling records and different documents, and are in the near future going to be helping develop some indigenous curriculum and programming for the Stonington Historical Society, now that it's mandated by the state to teach Native histories. So just a beautiful moment in history, and a great opportunity to work with a local historical society who's never even had a Pequot serve on their board prior.
Mm-hmm. So the Madison Historical Society, just so you know, we have a collection as well of Native American objects and tools, and we had a very good friend who unfortunately passed away. I think it's coming on now for 2 years. In any case, he helped us to identify some of them, but told us a lot of them were misidentified. So we are keen to get a lot of our things correctly labeled and identified. Is that something that we would bring to you, or is there a consultant that might come to us to help with that, or how would that work?
Yeah, you can reach out to me, and I can have our collections manager take a peek, and I can have our lab tech take a peek as well. And it's your choice. They can come to you, or we can arrange for you to come in.
Okay, we have another question that's come in, is a language question. What kind of alphabet, what type of characters are used in your documents?
Yes, so it's the English alphabet. It's SNE, Southeastern New England Algonquin. And it traces back to more of the original language of this area. Pequot language holds more original language, Algonquin language, than most of the other dialects around us. And it is, traditionally, we aren't writing anything down. So we weren't using any type of alphabet, but we used wampum belts and different things to tell stories, and kind of like the hieroglyphic style writing in those sense. But today we just write in English, and there are different accent points that we put over certain words. Like, for example, moccasin traditionally is makanash, and that is plural for both. So makana is one and makanash is two. So nash is a way to add on and make it plural.
Another question: have the Pequots been involved in any NAGPRA transactions within Connecticut?
Yeah, so I had a working relationship with our Tribal Historic Preservation Office. I worked there for a little while as well. And I know that our TIPO, our Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, has been working with different NAGPRA items and working on repatriating things. That is something.
To say, define what NAGPRA is.
NAGPRA is it's the National American. It's the Graves and Repatriation Act, and we have been trying to make the museum a hub for NAGPRA, and we have a lot of places all over the state that have different tribes items and working on helping repatriate them and bring them back to where they're supposed to be. Huge examples of NAGPRA are like the Onondaga wampum belts being repatriated and given back to the people, the Seneca people, the Onondaga people. And those belts were pre-contact and some were post-contact, but they were repatriated to the people, and they're able to use them in ceremonies today and use them for their intended purpose. So NAGPRA is all about getting items back to their homes. And it's just now, I don't know if it got approved or not, but it's in the works to make it international as well, which would allow, repatriation from like the British Museum and Dutch as well, which have a ton of Eastern Woodland objects.
I think that may be it, unless anyone else has any other questions. I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure. It's been very, very interesting. Did you want to wrap up by just saying, how people visit the museum or the hours
Absolutely.
when they're open? If I know we have a couple of educators, I think, who have joined us today. So did you want to just mention about the museum?
Absolutely. So the museum currently is open only on Wednesdays until March 26th, and then we're open Wednesday through Saturday, 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. On our website, you can see and go to our group bookings if you're coming with a school group or a class. That way you're going to be able to get the group rate, but if you're just coming with the family, you can walk right up on a Wednesday and you'll come in the main entrance, and all our exhibits are open. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up in April with Kids Week. We have Birds of Prey. We're doing a turtle program as well, which they're bringing all different types of turtles. We're presently have a basket exhibit running with mostly Pequot baskets, and it also touched on the emerald ash borer, the invasive species who's harming our ash trees today and making it hard for our basket makers. But we're the largest Native American museum in the world. The building is 305,000 square feet. We have 85,000 square feet of exhibit space with a beautiful landscape around us. And I encourage you guys to take the time to come out. And if you do, feel free to ask for me and I'll take you guys around, or at least pop in on you and check how you're doing.
So kind of you. Thank you so very much. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, everyone. Please email me your suggestions for future talks. Thank you.